a polite madness. Welcome to a world framed in velvet and shadow, where the rhythm of civility is more than custom, it is control. Tonight, we gently descend into the world of the Post-Victorian Asylum for the extremely polite, a fabricated yet eerily plausible space where manners became both comfort and cage. Allow your breathing to soften, your thoughts to settle, and your imagination to drift beyond time. Imagine yourself walking beneath dim chandeliers that do not flicker, through hallways lined with portraits that do not blink, each painted smile frozen in genteel perfection. This is not an asylum of screams and chains, but one of porcelain teacups, fainting couches, and perfectly timed bows, where the clink of a spoon is a signal, and each apology conceals a coded rebellion. Tonight, we uncover its delicate horrors and the unexpected freedom found in irony. Let us begin gently by immersing ourselves in the daily rhythm. The gentle madness of civility begins at dawn. The ritual of quiet sanity. The day begins not with alarm bells, but with the distant sound of artificial birds chirping standard greetings in elegant repetition. Delightful morning, delightful morning. The patient awakes not in a bed, but on a chaise lounge, angled just so to encourage compliant posture. Imagine yourself stirring slowly beneath embroidered linens. The walls are padded but with damask, not restraint. There is no screaming here, only murmurs. No rush, only ritual. A nurse, silent, gloved, and perfectly coiffed, places your slippers 2 inches from your left heel. Before breakfast, there is bow practice. You stand before a mirror, nod slowly, precisely, apologizing before any gesture that may interrupt the room's harmony, sneezes, coughs, or even an audible sigh. The dining room, lavishly adorned, offers meals untouched by urgency. Tea is served with eye contact lowered. Toasts are raised only after permission is given by the head of etiquette. The conversations, scripted. Patients recite pleasantries, like actors repeating lines they no longer understand, the cadence lulling, the syntax curiously comforting. If one speaks out of turn, even kindly, the consequence is not a reprimand, but a therapy session involving a full hour of silence shared with 2 nurses who stared gently but unblinkingly. The rhythm of their lives is mesmerizing. They walk in loops, never abrupt. All hallways curve. There are no corners in the asylum. Everything flows. Even their thoughts are guided by suggestion. Perhaps you might consider being more discreet with your emotions, says a counselor, never raising her voice above a whisper. And yet, beneath the surface, there is movement. Eyes flicker when the phrase, "May I excuse myself?" is repeated twice in a conversation. It signals a polite conspiracy. There is a chamber for fainting, not out of illness, but etiquette. Our diaries written only in ink, diluted with rose water. Smells are gentle, lavender and powdered marble. But behind the perfumes lies a truth that lingers, hinting politeness may preserve dignity, but it can quietly unravel sanity. The quietest rebellion. Silence, in the asylum, is a language of its own, not merely an absence of sound, but a presence, weighted and expectant. It is punishment, yes, but delivered not with threats or isolation, rather with companionship so intense it becomes oppressive. You are guided into the chamber of reflection. It is softly lit, the furniture plush and symmetrical. Two nurses sit across from you, their eyes locked with yours. They do not blink, they do not speak. Their gloved hands rest serenely on their knees. You are expected to sit and apologize for what exactly is never stated. A cough, a loud swallow, or laughter to free. Silence draws out your every misstep, reflecting it like a mirror made of hush. This therapy, they say, deepens the soul. In truth, it unravels it. Imagine yourself counting the seconds through the ticking of a gilded clock. Each tick an accusation, each talk a demand for perfection. There are no questions here, only endless expectation. You speak only when dismissed. Yet within this hush, a resistance murmurs. The rituals, bowing, apologizing, sipping tea in a prescribed cadence, have become tools of subtle defiance. A patient bows 3 times instead of 1. Too much politeness, it's suspicious. Another clinks her spoon thrice on porcelain before sipping, each chime a prearranged signal. Smiles are sharpened with irony, compliments loaded with double meanings. In the asylum for the extremely polite, rebellion must be invisible. It wears powder, blue waistcoats, curtsies before escaping, and says, "I do hope you'll forgive me," before dismantling norms. There's a secret dance in the gardens where patients pretend to prune hedges. In reality, they're exchanging written missives folded into faux blossoms. Each note is bathed in polite ink, pale lavender or mint. The text is nonsense to outsiders, the chrysanthemum knows. But within the asylum, it means the plan is in motion. Rebellion is ritual here. It is cloaked in curtsy and wrapped in calm. You never hear a shout, but you might catch the faint rustle of pages torn from etiquette manuals, hidden behind embroidered panels. Even therapy has its subversions. Patients speak truths masked as metaphors. Sometimes the silver spoon feels heavier than expected. Therapists nod, oblivious. The spoon is code. It's a name, a location, a moment. And so, as evening falls and gowns rustle across the tiled corridors, you might feel it, that slow thrum beneath civility, a polite pulse of resistance, not with noise, never with noise, but in every perfectly bowed head, a spark. Curtains of courtesy, symbols, codes, and the etiquette stage, when rebellion must wear the mask of civility. Every object becomes a messenger, objects that speak without words in the asylum. Symbolic objects are woven into the fabric of daily life, designed to soothe, but quietly repurposed to communicate. Handkerchiefs, for instance, carry a delicate code. A fold to the right corner implies, "Meet me in the fainting room." 2 embroidered violets stitched beside a scalloped hem. Trust no one wearing rosewater. Brooches have become emblems of allegiances. Patience in the irony circle where miniature teaspoons cast in pewter. Those loyal to Madame Fleur wear cameo pins with inverted silhouettes, faces turned away in defiance. Umbrellas, never opened indoors, of course, serve as directional guides. Rested against a wall facing east, the rebellion gathers at dawn. Every gesture and accessory harbors intent. Even the placement of gloves, fingers down, palm up, crossed, or parallel, can convey complex messages, sympathy, defiance, or surrender. But these codes are not carved in stone. They shift, evolve, and require vigilance. A single misplaced fan can incite suspicion. A velvet ribbon tied thrice around the wrist might provoke a visit from the etiquette supervisor, whose inquiries are laced with charm and dread. The theater of controlled expression. On Thursday evenings, patients gather in the ornamental theater, where the stage is gilt, the curtains of damask, and the rules absolute. The plays performed are adaptations of Victorian etiquette manuals. Dialogue consists of greetings, apologies, invitations declined with tact, and the occasional well-mannered insult. It's a wonder your intellect isn't entirely decorative. Imagine yourself seated beneath crystal chandeliers, watching characters curtsy, sip tea, and suffer politely. The actors are chosen not for talent, but for their control. Emotion must never overwhelm decorum. In one infamous production, The Ballad of Miss Petunia's Improper Thank You, a patient bowed twice before a cue, sparking whispers throughout the asylum. A week later, she was reassigned to the ward of repetition, where she repeated the phrase, "Thank you most sincerely," for 4 hours each day. Some believe the theater is where the deepest rebellions bloom. Costumes conceal notes. Lines spoken with faint emphasis indicate real events. Scripts are altered subtly. Would you care for a biscuit? Becomes, would you dare to risk it? After each performance, applause is forbidden. Instead, there's a synchronized smile, gentle, identical, eerie, but those who know can read it. A smile tilted by 3 degrees is a signal. The truth was staged tonight. The lavender spoon, a symbol steeped in silence. Among the many tokens of cryptic defiance in the asylum, none holds more whispered reverence than the lavender spoon. Origins beneath politeness. It was not forged in rebellion at first. The spoon began as a therapeutic instrument, delicate, rounded, cast from softened pewter, its handle enameled in pale lavender. Supposedly, it was chosen for its calming color, meant to ease tremors and instill calm during mealtime among those most agitated by internal struggle. But it didn't stay innocent for long. Whispers suggest that the first spoon was engraved, not visibly, but beneath the enamel. A patient, once a silversmith, embedded a message in microscopic etching. The kindness they require is silence. She was never seen again after the spoon was discovered. From that moment, the lavender spoon became a legend. a spoon as calendar, map, and message. Patients began to subtly repurpose the spoon's shape, position, and presence as a language of shared secrets. If one placed it vertically atop a napkin, a rebellion meeting at midnight, hidden in a shoe, relocation due to surveillance, stirred clockwise, then tapped 3 times. A new code book is circulating. Some spoons had slight warping, intentional bends at the tip, a signal that the bearer was one of Madame Fleur's quiet circle. These patients operated in shadows and sarcasm, infiltrating etiquette therapy sessions and misguiding the therapists with wildly polished manners. Rituals of spoon binding. Each full moon, observed by the asylum's ornamental lunar clock, patients would participate in the unspoken ritual of spoon binding. In the gardens, beneath the marble bust of Queen Manners III, spoons were tied with ribbon, white for grief, violet for hope, black for rebellion. No words were exchanged. Each patient who placed a bound spoon left with gloves slightly askew, a silent mark that they had participated. The staff, always elegant but slow to decode symbols, dismissed it as seasonal melancholy. In truth, it was orchestration. Disappearance and preservation. Many spoons were confiscated and melted down, recast into meaningless objects like napkin rings or curtain hooks. But a handful survived, hidden inside piano legs, beneath layers of wallpaper, or buried within the stuffed back of etiquette manuals. One was even worn inside a corset pressed against the ribcage, a constant ache reminding its bearer of resistance. Historians of polite rebellion, those rare archivists who study etiquette as subversion, believe the lavender spoon was the asylum's Rosetta Stone, not just an object, but a culture, a quiet plea for autonomy, carved in gesture, not sound. Whispers on paper and melodies in secret, the rebel lullabies and manuals of mannered defiance, in a place where every word is scrutinized and every tone polished to perfection. Subversion must hum softly in the form of music and print. Rebel lullabies, songs sung in silence, in the dim hush of the dormitories. After the final bows and compulsory gratitude rituals came the lullabies, not sung loudly, never sung truly, just murmured, barely breathed. They called them the velvet whispers, songs designed not to soothe children, but to stir the slumbering spirit of patience conditioned into compliance. These lullabies were composed by the anonymous choir, an uncredited group of individuals who weaved coded resistance into rhythm. One such lullaby begins: "Fold the napkin twice tonight, the moon will mark our stride. Sip your tea and hold your tongue, but never close your eyes." These verses weren't just poetic, they were functional. They referenced meeting times, encrypted gestures, or memory cues. The lullabies passed mouth to ear, never written down. Yet somehow they endured. Each patient added a verse, a variation, until some lullabies became catalogs of covert history. Some tunes were based on etiquette drills. A bow was synchronized to a hummed note. A step backward signaled defiance. To staff, it was comfort music. To rebels, it was strategy. Coded etiquette manuals, pages of polite rebellion. Then came the indirect codex, a seemingly ordinary etiquette guide bound in violet velvet and stamped with the asylum seal. Within its pages, columns taught proper table posture, conversational restraint, and glove management, at least at first glance, but its diagrams held secrets. A sketch of a fork placed left of the plate, with a curl in the handle. That curl aligned with a cipher. Sample dialogues presented ludicrous greetings, like the sky apologizes for being so blue. These were not errors, they were linguistic keys. Chapter titles formed acrostics when read vertically, bows undo walls, and every silence speaks. The asylum therapists even used the manual for training. Unaware, it educated their subjects in defiance. Copies multiplied, some smuggled within the spines of Shakespeare plays, others hidden inside hollowed-out etiquette pamphlets offered in the foyer. There was a rumored chapter, long lost, that revealed the 4 apologies of escape. The morning apology, delivered with hands folded, it signals readiness. The tea apology, paired with 3 sips and a raised brow, the moment is imminent. The curtain apology, spoken near heavy drapes, time to move. The final apology, said to no one in particular, it is the goodbye. These weren't apologies, really, they were keys. In these lullabies and manuals, rebellion was tender, wrapped in velvet syntax, and rhymed rebellion. They taught the mind to fight with grace, to mask struggle behind decorum, and to recognize that even silence, if wielded precisely, could echo like thunder. Leaf and dream, prophecies in porcelain, secrets in sleep. Within the quiet architecture of the asylum, 2 more rituals flourish, not as assigned therapies, but as patient-initiated forms of quiet knowing. One steeped in herbs and porcelain, the other in ink and memory. Tea leaf, prophecies, reading, civility's future. Tea, in the Post-Victorian Asylum, is not a refreshment, it is a ceremony. The preparation alone is prescribed with reverence. Silver kettles polished by moonlight, leaves measured by weight, not volume, and water poured only from north-facing spouts. Patients are taught to stir without ripples, sip without sound, and finish without residue. But in the privacy of select chambers, often the conservatory of reflection, some patients engage in a forbidden extension of this ritual, the reading of leaves. After finishing a cup, a patient might tilt the porcelain slightly, pretending to admire the glaze, but their gaze falls upon the fragments of leaf sediment nestled in the base, chaotic shapes and whispered patterns. It's here. They read futures, not destinies, but intentions. A cluster in the shape of a spoon. An ally arrives, a trail like a curtsy. You must retreat with grace, a crescent curled within a star. Tonight is the night. These readings became a language. Some even used tea leaves as ballots, voting on decisions within rebellion circles. One patient famously described a reading as the only truth that speaks after silence. Some staff grew suspicious. Leaf reading became punishable if observed. Patients adapted. They began reading the vapors, the rim residue, even the tint in remaining water. Prophecy refused to fade. Dream journals passed in plain sight. Each patient is issued a restfulness log, a pale blue journal intended to track sleeping habits. Pages are lined, dates pre-written. Staff expected dull entries, slept calmly from 10 to 6, or woke briefly from anxiety. But the entries transformed. Beneath surface reports, rebels began embedding dreams laced with allegory. At first, descriptions were vague. I dreamt of porcelain birds that sang off-key. Later, they grew bolder. A spoon danced with violets while curtains sighed. These weren't dreams. They were announcements, warnings, invitations. Each journal passed between patients during etiquette sessions. They exchanged them openly. "May I borrow your dream, madam?" became a standard phrase. Staff believed it communal therapy. Patients knew it was transmission. Certain patients adopted dream aliases. One called himself the fainter. His dreams often began with collapse and ended with escape. Another was Lady Teacup, whose entries were riddled with playful absurdities, masking maps, times, and names. There, logs circulated, copied, adapted. Soon, a small drawer in the East Wing lounge was unofficially dubbed the archive, a resting place for dreams that couldn't be risked aloud. These rituals, leaf and dream, offered patience, not just solace, but direction. They marked time, indicated loyalty, and sustained hope in a place where even voice was curated. They were the whispers beneath the rules, the breath beneath the bow. The archive, a cabinet of whispered realities, hidden behind a brocade curtain in the East Wing lounge, nestled between a disused umbrella stand and a faux fire grate, sits the archive, a modest drawer with velvet lining and no label. It is overlooked by design, the coded catalog system. To an outsider, the contents of the archive appear benign, stacks of pale blue notebooks, embossed with the emblem of restfulness. But each journal is part of an elaborate catalog system built on etiquette, logic. Journals stamped with curved corner crests signify visions of rebellion. Dreams centered on escape, subversion, or coded guidance. Those with tea-stain markings record prophetic or surreal dreams, often involving spoons, birds, curtains, or shadowed corridors. A select few, bound with inverted stitching, are classified as unspoken realities, entries too explicit to be safely shared aloud, likely involving prior punishments or vanished patients. The catalog order follows neither date nor author name, but instead the emotional tone of the final sentence. For instance, a closing line like, "And so I smiled," though the moon had turned its back, would be categorized under quiet defiance. "I bowed until I forgot my own name," fits under collapsed identity. Each tone group is designated by a symbolic object: teacup, curtain tie, glove button, spoon. These metaphors are known only to those inducted into the archive ritual, a ceremony marked by pressing one's hand into the velvet lining and whispering, "I remember the fainting bird." The most infamous dream entry, "The spoon did not stir," among the archivists, those silent curators who rotate weekly. The entry titled, "The spoon did not stir," is spoken of with quiet reverence. It reads, "I sat at the tea table, alone, the porcelain cold before me. The spoon lay beside the cup, gleaming, still unnatural in its refusal. I lifted it. It fell through my fingers, as if rejecting me. Around me, the walls bent inward, not menacing, but expectant. A nurse placed her gloved hand over mine and said nothing. Behind her, the curtains flickered, though no breeze passed. I saw Madame Fleur, or her shadow. She did not bow. She did not apologize. She placed her own spoon atop mine. It dissolved. I sipped the tea. It tasted like forgetfulness. This dream is considered legendary for several reasons. It implies direct spiritual contact with Madame Fleur, rare even among rebels. The dissolving spoon signifies the abandonment of assigned identity. Forgetfulness, as flavor, is interpreted as the awakening of true memory, a contradiction cloaked in compliance. Some believe this dream catalyzed a sequence of silent gestures leading to the Great Curtain Shift, an event in which every East Wing patient refused eye contact for a week, effectively dismantling mandatory etiquette therapy without uttering a word. The journal that holds this entry remains wrapped in lace and secured with a curtain tie inside the archive. Those who touch it describe a sensation like sipping sunlight through velvet. Madame Fleur and the Politeness Rebellion. If the asylum was a tapestry of velvet rituals, Madame Fleur was the errant thread, unraveling it all with grace. Arrival, the seamstress of irony. She entered under the guise of a genteel patient, a retired etiquette instructor with an impeccable record of manners and a fondness for lavender gloves. Her bow was flawless, her apologies timed to perfection. Yet something in her smile, it didn't seek approval. It announced war. Staff were charmed. Patients were curious. She introduced herself as Fleur Audacity de Papillon, claiming her surname came from a long line of conversational stylists. It was never confirmed. Her file said little. Her presence said everything. She began attending therapy sessions with passive perfection, but soon her compliments grew unusual. "You're terribly insightful, considering your conversational limitations." What a stunning example of personal restraint, especially for someone so emotionally turbulent. Her words sliced, but only just, wrapped in bows and dipped in sugar. Disrupting therapy through wit. Therapists couldn't diagnose her. They tried. What they found was a paradox. A woman with compulsive politeness, but an allergic reaction to sincerity. Her irony became her tool of truth. She'd mimic their mantras, then distort them. Let's breathe in gratitude and exhale excess emotion became let's inhale submission and exhale the inconvenient self. Group sessions crumbled. Patients who listened began speaking, less or speaking better. They mastered sarcasm as shield, ambiguity as armor. Fleur trained her quiet circle not to shout, but to lace each line with double meaning. Under her influence, resistance sharpened. Not loud, not violent, but exquisitely devastating. The etiquette coup, a revolution in teacups. She is credited with orchestrating what became known among rebels as the smile that broke the system. One afternoon, during a supervised tea ceremony, Fleur delivered an apology so perfectly timed, so exquisitely worded, and so obviously false that the therapist froze mid-pour. "I do so regret my inability to comprehend your explanation," she said. "It must be simply too advanced for my inadequate disposition." The teapot shattered. not physically, but ideologically. In the days that followed, patients began refusing therapy by attending it too enthusiastically. Bows were exaggerated until staff began to question their sincerity. Scripts used in plays became sarcastic counter-narratives of actual asylum protocols. Fleur didn't lead marches or write manifestos. She curated expression. She modeled duplicity. She turned civility into camouflage. The vanishing, then, without ceremony, she vanished. Some say she escaped. Others believe she was absorbed by the asylum itself, its essence quietly transformed by her presence. A few claim her gloves remain in the archive, tied around a spoon, inscribed faintly with the words, "Nothing sharpens truth like courtesy." Her legacy endures, not in shouting crowds, but in synchronized smiles, in spoon signals, and in teacups stained by defiant dreams. The doctrine of decorum. Madame Fleur's mentorship rituals. Madame Fleur, for all her irony-laced charisma, was no chaotic insurgent. Her rebellion was curated, sculpted, taught. Beneath her arched brow and shimmering sarcasm lay a discipline, an unspoken philosophy that she imparted to her quiet circle through rituals of grace. The initiation of the whispered smile. Her mentorship began not with lectures, but with a gesture. Each selected patient was summoned privately, usually under the pretense of a shared etiquette refresher. Fleur would offer tea, poured to the exact rhythm of a lullaby. When the porcelain cup was set upon the saucer with 4 deliberate ticks, it signaled the beginning. She'd lean in and say, almost inaudibly, "Politeness is the dagger no one sees, so polish it with care." This was the motto of the quiet circle, a blade disguised by silk. The initiation concluded with a mirrored smile. Fleur would smile just slightly off-center, and the initiate would reflect it. From then on, their sarcasm would be crafted, not performed. The study of contradictory truths. Fleur's circle was trained in what she called the 3 truths of civil rebellion. Obedience exposes weakness. The more flawlessly you follow, the more you observe. Sincerity is a luxury. True feelings should be preserved, not displayed. Irony heals what rules cannot. Wit is the only antidote to imposed decorum. She illustrated these truths through case studies, conversations overheard, etiquette failures punished too harshly, compliments that made patients weep quietly in their pillows. Each circle member kept a paradox log, a small violet book where they recorded moments of social contradiction. She thanked the nurse for her punishment. He bowed while locking eyes, unforgivable and transcendent. These paradoxes became reference points for future rebellions. Rituals of the Velvet Theater. One of Fleur's most unusual mentorship tools was the Velvet Theater, a private drama performed behind curtain partitions and muffled by layers of brocade. Only the circle attended. Roles were reversed. Therapists were played as nervous, apologetic figures. Patients as serene arbiters of truth. Conflicts resolved, not with honesty, but with flawless manners, masking pointed critique. Scripts were improvised around themes like the tea that refused to cool or the bow that bent too far. Symbolic narratives that mirrored real tensions within the asylum. Fleur would sometimes pause performances to pose questions. When does a curtsy become a threat? What if your apology reverses someone else's truth? Answers were never given, only studied. Final teachings, the etiquette of escape. Fleur's mentorship concluded with a private farewell, always disguised as a polite rebuke. She would say something like, "You seem very good at following directions. I do hope you remain exactly where you are." That was the cue. Within 72 hours, the mentored patient would relocate, sometimes to a less monitored wing, occasionally into the archive, and once rumored out of the asylum entirely. Fleur never confirmed these orchestrations. She merely left behind faint lavender glove imprints on chairbacks and fading perfume notes in the corridors. Fragments of a philosophy too polite to be declared, but powerful enough to reshape a system. The Protégé and the Paradox, a study of Miss Vale. Among the circle of mentees shaped by Madame Fleur's unspoken curriculum, one name surfaces, often in the footnotes of rebellion. Miss Vale, a patient of quiet intensity. Her path from compliant etiquette to masterful subversion offers a glimpse into the depth of Fleur's influence. Eloan's entrance, grace personified. Eloan arrived as an embodiment of institutional success, posture impeccable, voice like perfumed parchment, her apologies timed not by instinct but calculation. Staff considered her a model patient, never questioning, always composed. But Fleur saw the tightly woven conflict behind her smile. She selected Eloan not for her polish, but for her restraint. Beneath the surface was a mind-craving paradox. Their first meeting ended not with a compliment, but with a question. "Do you ever dream of polite chaos?" Eloan replied, "Only when I sleep correctly." She was ready. The velvet debate rituals to sharpen minds and veiled resistance. Fleur employed a peculiar teaching method, coded debates. These weren't arguments, they were exercises in eloquent contradiction, held in the solarium during unsupervised reflection. Hours, patients would sit facing mirrors and conduct exchanges through euphemism. Fleur would pose a topic. Is sincerity the enemy of refinement? Can rebellion be courteous? If you bow to deception, are you still noble? Eloan would respond with phrases like, "If refinement remains untested, it decays into performance." Courtesy, when weaponized, bruises no bones but fractures control. The debates followed strict form, no direct negation. Each statement must begin with a gesture, glove touch, spoon lift, head tilt. Contradictions had to feel like compliments. These contests weren't scored, but Eloan's lines were copied, whispered, eventually immortalized in the Fleur Codex, a hidden appendix in one of the archive's spine-bound journals. Her pivotal moment, the courtesy collapse, during one famed debate. Fleur asked, "Is obedience a kindness or a silence too loud?" Eloan paused. The entire room held its breath. She then offered, "Obedience may begin as a kindness, but end as a disappearance." We applauded. That line spread. It appeared later inscribed beneath a spoon, hidden in a velvet pouch. It was spoken by 3 patients at once during a tea ritual silently, lips moving in sync. It was stitched into a glove lining and embroidered onto a curtain hem. Eloan's phrasing became a slogan of polite refusal, departure, and echo. Eloan left the circle quietly, no ceremony. Her journal vanished from the archive. A single glove was found tied to a curtain rod near the conservatory. Beneath it, pressed against the velvet wall lining, was a note. In spoon code, she curtsied goodbye before they even noticed she'd left. Her legacy remains not in documentation, but in cadence. Her influence echoes in how rebels phrase disagreement with harmony, and how silence now speaks in rounded vowels and soft syllables. The duel beneath decorum and the echoes of Elawan, where resistance is polished to a sheen. Even confrontation must glitter politely. And in the gilded drawing room of the asylum, a singular debate played out between Madame Fleur and chief therapist Thorn, now immortalized in whispered footnotes and embroidered glove linings. The legendary duel, Fleur versus Thorn therapist. Thorn was no fool. He was known for his mirror method of therapy, a technique involving patient-led discussions reflected back through scripted empathy. It was hailed as revolutionary until he met Fleur during a symposium tea, a structured gathering to reinforce etiquette values. Thorn presented a premise: politeness is a shared virtue. Without it, chaos knocks gently. Fleur, sipping from a cup she'd brought herself, slightly chipped, which was a statement in itself, responded, "Chaos does knock gently. It waits politely while we prepare its place at the table." What followed was a masterclass in double entendre. Thorn, but boundaries framed in courtesy allow the soul to rest. Fleur, indeed, though some souls require unrest to know they are alive. Each line mimicked a form of agreement, though every agreement unwound his premise thread by thread. The audience, staff, and patients alike applauded softly, unsure of who had won. But in the quiet circle, that conversation became scripture. Patients began replicating Fleur's cadence, using contradiction as resistance, subtle agreement as inversion. Thorn soon retired. His mirror methods began producing reflections he couldn't interpret, the whispered network of Elawan Vale. After her discreet departure, Elawan's presence evolved, not physical, but in her network spread like lace across the institution, delicate, patterned, nearly invisible. Message vessels, patients left rolled paper messages inside hollowed-out etiquette manuals labeled Volume 4, Apologies in Empire, Glove. Closets became communication hubs, notes tucked beneath leather linings, sealed with miniature spoon stamps. A borrowed phrase, "Consider me folded and pressed," became shorthand for trust and readiness. Loyalists and roles, the network organized itself organically. The folders, patients who initiated new members, using coded gestures during tea ceremony, bows. The drapers, responsible for curtain-based signals, altering ties and pleats to indicate time-sensitive plans. The dusters, those who erased traces, lifting fingerprints from archive drawers, rescenting notes to mask authorship. Elawan's voice echoed through the dream journals. Her tone could be recognized by a particular cadence, 5-syllable openings, metaphorical closings, themes of erosion masked in floral imagery. One patient wrote, "Last night I dreamt that manners peeled off like petals." Elawan stood behind the garden gate, counting silences. No one had seen her. Everyone felt her. These stories weren't retold. They were reenacted in spoon taps, in theatrical pauses. in smiles that meant yes, when rules insisted they mean fine. Dream echoes and the velvet vanishings of Elowan Vale. Elowan's legacy did not fade with her departure. It deepened, diffused, and became ritual. Her impact turned whispers into tradition, transforming individual dreams into communal myth. Patients began treating her dream patterns as guides, and when some began vanishing with eerie grace, her name became synonymous with passage from etiquette to emancipation. Dream journal interpretations, the map within metaphor after Elowan's disappearance. Her cadence lived on. Patience began emulating her dream structure, favoring soft surrealism, symmetrical phrasing, and botanical allegory. But archivists noticed more than style. There were patterns, a set of entries written by patients days before their own velvet vanishings bore uncanny resemblance to Elowan's final log. I walked the halls with silence wrapped round my wrists like ribbon. The garden clock was missing its hands, yet time obeyed. My spoon blinked once, then never again. These weren't dreams. They were preambles, signals woven in ink. Archivists dubbed them departure visions. A tonal shift.com, resolved, rich with encoded farewell. Common motifs began to emerge, curtains stirring without breeze, symbolic permission granted, garden paths folding inward like origami, internal routes to evasion, apologies spoken to empty chairs, closure, not compliance. Interpretation became sacred. A quiet librarian patient named Mr. Dovewell began cataloging them into themes: petal farewells, tea-scented resistance, echoes of spoonfall. His glossary remains sealed in the archive beneath a velvet square embroidered with Elowan's initial E.V. The velvet vanishings, ritualized disappearances. There was no record of removal, no paperwork, no formal relocation. But every few months, a patient of particular stillness and linguistic precision would simply not arrive for bow practice. Their room would be empty, their glove pairings reassigned. When asked, staff simply replied, "Their program has evolved." Those who vanished all shared traits: meticulous dream journals, participation in Fleur's coded debates, familiarity with the spoon doctrine and curtain signals. Speculation flourished. Some believed a passageway existed behind the fainting chamber, a velvet-draped tunnel lined with brooches and contradictory philosophies. Others thought the archive itself held the key, that placing one's dream log in a specific drawer, bowed over it, and whispered "the spoon has stirred," would trigger relocation. One archived entry, attributed to a vanished patient, read, "Tonight I dress in absence. The tea forgets me. The spoon nods once. I go with manners intact." It is considered the purest example of a velvet farewell, a departure so polite it erases the need for explanation. Elowan's legacy transcends rebellion. She became a figure of transition, someone who taught that to truly escape control, one must be perfectly unremarkable and gently unforgettable. The Spoon Corridor and Mr. Dovewell's whispered glossary. Beyond the velvet rituals, beneath the perfumed veils of civility, lies one of the asylum's most elusive structures, the Spoon Corridor, and at its heart stands the quiet cartographer of resistance, Mr. Dovewell. a dream librarian whose glossary unravels metaphors into maps. The spoon corridor passage of polite abandon. Few claim to have walked it, even fewer admit it. The spoon corridor is rumored to begin behind the third curtain in the fainting chamber. A panel slightly more faded, embroidered with a vine pattern that subtly forms the shape of a curtsy mid-motion. Those granted passage do not receive keys. They perform a ritual. Place a lavender spoon horizontally across a folded napkin. Whisper a departure verse. I am absence, wrapped in etiquette. The curtain knows me. Step into the mirror, not through it, but beside it, into a paneled, hollow lined with silence and soft reflection. The corridor is said to be narrow, but not claustrophobic, lined with glass cases holding coded objects, gloves tied with thistle thread, sugar cubes carved with initials, and perfume bottles that hum if tilted a certain way. At the end, a door, polished, unlabeled, opening not with force, but timing. Entry requires stillness, a bowed head, and a genuine false apology. What lies beyond remains unnamed. Some say it leads to the Violet Wing, a supposed haven of liberated patients who live by Fleur's third truth. Irony heals what rules cannot. Others suggest it simply curves endlessly, a loop for those who refuse the final bow. Mr. Dovewell's Whispered Glossary, a lexicon of rebellion. Mr. Dovewell was never assigned to the archive. He simply appeared, tidy, thin-lipped eyes, kind but clouded with perpetual analysis. He claimed dreams were not abstract. They were coded language, desperate for transcription. Over years of archive stewardship, he compiled a document referred to only by gesture, 2 fingers grazing the palm. Known among rebels as the Whispered Glossary, its contents are less definitions and more decoding mechanisms. Sample glossary. Entries. Curtains, sigh, gives resistance gathering, hold position. Tea won't cool, gives urgent, plan has changed. I dreamt of apologizing to a bird, gives information was exposed. Prepare, silence. My spoon hums, gives message received successfully. The glossary includes grammatical cues. A dream line beginning with "and then I bowed" typically marks a shift in loyalty. Sentences ending in colors are warnings. Repetition of floral imagery suggests identity concealment. Dovewell's index was never copied. It was memorized by select rebels, passed on via polite debates and coded lullabies. Some claim he created spoon charms infused with his meanings, worn behind cravats, disguised as cufflinks. Eventually, Mr. Dovewell vanished too. A dream log was found tucked beneath the archive drawer. The corridor accepts those who curtsy twice before sleep. My spoon no longer stirs, it listens. The fainting chamber diaries, between the cushions, beneath the silence, as the night deepens. We now turn quietly toward the softest of sanctuaries, and one of the most enigmatic repositories of resistance within the asylum, the fainting chambers. The chamber architecture of surrender. Imagine yourself drifting into the chamber's hush. Light filters through lace curtains, diffused until time feels uncertain. Velvet fainting couches, curved like commas in suspended thought, line the walls in patient symmetry. Everything here suggests respite, and yet beneath the cushions lies a network of delicate rebellion. The fainting chambers were designed for therapeutic collapse, for emotional moments too powerful to be voiced aloud, but for those whose subversion wore gloves and bows. These couches became vaults for secrecy. The diary's codes in calico and ink, tucked deep inside the seams of upholstery, stitched under lace piping, and folded into the hollow armrests. Small journals were hidden, known among rebels as the fainting diaries. These notebooks held stories, too dangerous for archive entry and too personal for debate ritual. Each diary bore no name, but was easily identified by signature elements. Ink tinted faint rose or soot gray to avoid detection under blue hospital lighting. Entries dated, not by calendar, but by tea ceremony themes. The day of quiet apology, the third spoon stir, rainfall behind the curtain. Language composed entirely of civility, but layered with metaphor. A typical entry might read, "Today I excused myself from a conversation before it began. The garden clock was missing again. I bowed without knowing to whom. Nurse Victoria's gloves were fragrant with lemon. This has implications. My dreams are folding like napkins. Tomorrow I may forget my apology." To an uninformed reader, it seems whimsical, but to those versed in spoon doctrine and whispered glossary interpretation, it's a strategic report. Codified expressions, the dictionary of courtesy patterns, emerged across multiple diaries. Gloves scented gives surveillance intensity. Curtains drawn backward gives corridor access, may be shifting. The spoon blinked gives a signal was missed or corrupted. My fainting was preemptive gives punishment likely avoided. Some entries paired with fabric swatches, lightly perfumed used to signal emotional state. Lavender for clarity, rose for deflection, coriander for dissent. Others embedded pressed petals, mimicking earlier lullabies. A dried violet means, "Do not trust the smiling birds." A chrysanthemum shard suggests tonight is crucial. Bow with purpose. The collectors, guardians of the quiet archive, certain patients, trained by Madame Fleur or Eloin's successors, rotated through the fainting chambers, each dusk, not to faint, but to collect. Their gloves sewn with magnifying threads, fingertips attuned to seams and softness. They copied entries onto silk slips and distributed them through the velvet theater programs, tea menus, and dream log margins. One collector, recorded only as the apologizer, left this note deep within a broken chaise. The silence has become orchestral. Our notes exist between cushions and curtsies. If you faint with sincerity, they cannot catch your truth. These diaries are the lullaby behind rebellion, the poetry beneath pain. They soothe and stir, inviting sleep, and when read between lines, awakening purpose. The Velvet Page, a fainting diary that shifted the night, while hundreds of fainting diaries whispered small truths across cushions and silence. One entry changed everything. It is known as the Velvet Page, discovered in a chaise thought, be retired from use, its armrest sealed with a forgotten upholstery stitch, the orchid loop, a pattern linked to high security therapeutic furnishings. Discovery and preservation, a patient, known in archive code as the curtsier, was assigned to sweep the chamber, part of a weekly reflection maintenance ritual. But she recognized the looped stitch from a coded diagram Madame Fleur once passed through a staged sneeze. She gently pried open the seam, and there it was, a fainting diary bound in garnet velvet, pages crisp, ink-scented, with gnarly and uncommon choice suggesting urgency. The opening line, "Tonight, the etiquette will sigh too loudly. We must bow before it shouts." Excerpts from the velvet page, each entry threaded metaphor and message so intricately that archivists debated whether the diary was real or constructed as performance. But one particular page dated the ceremony of red biscuits, a tea ritual, known for its rigid silence, carried revelations. I watched as Nurse Ellery placed her glove's thumb down. It is no error. Her allegiance shifts. The garden birds repeated delightful, delightful 6 times. Too many. Surveillance blinked. Spoon placement reversed near the saucer, touching napkin edge. This signals corridor readiness. Dovewells. Glossary lacks this cadence. I must update without writing. The drapes shall carry it. This was not poetry, it was plan. Interpreted properly, it revealed a staff change in loyalty. Surveillance system being temporarily distracted. A planned activation of the spoon corridor. Impact, the discreet unraveling after its discovery. A silent ripple passed through the asylum. Spoon signals increased exponentially, patients tapping rhythmically in dining halls. Curtain arrangements across wings subtly changed, signaling directions, intent, readiness. 3 patients fainted ceremonially in unison, a mimicry previously unheard of, each with identical glove folding. Within 48 hours, 2 members of the quiet circle were relocated without record. 1 therapist requested leave, citing linguistic disorientation. The archive itself was temporarily locked after whispers claimed the velvet page could decode entries written in dreams, not ink. That diary, now encased in double velvet and stored behind a mirrored panel, is accessed only by pressing the correct glove against its frame and whispering, "I believe I fainted sincerely." Archivists say the ink still smells faintly of oranges. Decoded entry, evening tea, thistle spoon. Sigh twice. I asked for sugar, though it was already placed beside me. Decoded meaning, a signal of discontent toward assigned roles. In asylum parlance, requesting what has already been offered suggests a desire to reclaim autonomy. This is often used to announce, "I intend to redefine the obvious." The curtain swayed, although the air held still, its rhythm 2 folds, then pause. Decoded meaning, a classic spoon corridor activation cue. The rhythm matches the code for ready access. It indicates someone has reopened the discrete passage. 2 folds implies a bow sequence. The pause signifies waiting for alignment. Nurse Ellery wore gloves of chamomile, an unusual scent for Wednesday. Decoded meaning, staff allegiance shift. Chamomile, usually associated with calming routines, on a midweek cycle, implies altered surveillance patterns. Likely, she's signaling quiet consent or distraction, allowing movement within the dream archive. I coughed once before tea. I apologized 3 times. No one corrected me. Decoded, meaning a test of boundaries. The exaggerated apology routine without staff intervention marks a moment where control has loosened, a cue to act or speak more freely under perceived leniency. My spoon touched the napkin, then remained. Decoded meaning, contact between spoon and napkin represents conspiratorial readiness. It's an agreed code in etiquette rebellion circles for plan is set, do not alter the stillness. Afterward reinforces finality. I bowed at the window, not to anyone, just in case. Decoded meaning, symbolic reverence for unseen allies, a gesture to the network beyond the visible asylum, possibly a nod to a Lauenvale or to those watching from elsewhere in the system. Just in case implies ongoing surveillance or hopeful signal. The tea was cold. I drank it twice. Decoded meaning, cold tea usually connotes abandoned ritual or exposure. Drinking it twice may signal willingness to repeat risk or affirm solidarity despite discomfort. It's considered a gesture of personal resistance. Final line of the entry. I believe tonight the etiquette will forget its reason. Decoded meaning a prophecy cloaked in civility. This final line suggests the rules, so tightly wound, are beginning to fray, that rebellion has matured to the point where even the system may falter under the weight of its own ritual. The entire page is now regarded by archivists as the hinge point, where decorum tips into decay and ritual gives way to resonance. The garden parties of the administration, manners in mimicry, silence in control. The night leans into stillness as we step past curated corridors into the outer sanctuary of the asylum's hierarchy. The famed administrative gardens, a place where ritual isn't rehabilitative but observational. Setting the stage, the ornamental gardens. Imagine yourself walking into a garden, too symmetrical to be wild, too manicured to be natural. Hedge walls carved into polite shapes, a bow, a handshake, a smile. The paths curved gently through blooming geometry. Every petal is curated, every blade of grass trimmed as though apologies were made for their height. In this space, the staff, administrators in masked elegance, toast garden parties to observe patient progress. But these gatherings are no celebration. They are orchestrations of composure. Guests do not speak. Tea is poured with gloved hands in perfect silence. To request more sugar, one must tap their cup 3 times and adjust their posture by 5 degrees. Chairs are arranged so no back ever faces another. Laughter, though permitted, must never exceed a set decibel, measured discreetly by devices disguised as music boxes. The electric birds, surveillance in song, perched along vine-laced trellises are the electric birds. Mechanical observers wrapped in feathers, each with an internal recording spool and speaker embedded in their throats. They chirp phrases like, "Delightful weather we've been assigned. Gratitude is the loveliest scent. You curtsied with such integrity." Their voices are gentle, hollow, and eerily familiar. Some patients say the birds mimic past expressions, from therapy sessions, playing them back in curated scripts as surveillance feedback. To be complimented by a bird is not affirmation, it is assessment. Patients learn to smile softly at the birds, to blink slowly when recorded, to reply with phrases that convey nothing yet mask everything. Some birds wear tiny ribbons, an unofficial system of rank. The red-ribboned bird, nicknamed Director Wingtip, purportedly can detect false apologies by analyzing vocal inflections. Silent tea and social stratification at these gatherings. Patients are selected to serve tea, not as punishment, but as test. The porcelain is fragile, the rules more so. Serving with 2 fingers indicates compliance, stirring clockwise for more than 5 rotations suggests disorientation. Overfilling by half a centimeter may lead to reflection reassignment. Here, table placement defines hierarchy. Central seats go to modeled patience, those who've internalized decorum to perfection. Edge chairs are reserved for soft disruptors, those monitored for ritual inconsistencies. Shadow seating beneath. The pergola is for those whose gestures have begun to warp meaning, the suspected rebels. No one acknowledges this system aloud, but spoon placement betrays it. Central patients place spoons atop folded napkins, while shadow-seated patients leave them tilted, touching saucer edge, the code for watch the watchers. Closing the ceremony, the echo bow. The garden party ends, not with speech, but with a synchronized bow. Staff and patients alike tilt forward, heads low, lips shut, as a final electric bird chirps. Such lovely restraint, and in that moment, the party dissolves, not into celebration, but into data. Each gesture recorded, each silence catalogued. Behind it all, within the hedge maze, said to never truly end, murmurs persist, that Eloan once walked these parties in shadow, that Madame Fleur disguised herself as a server, that one bird buried beneath a pergola root still hums in her tone. Politeness as paradox, civility as echo. And so, dear traveler, we gently close the curtain on our long velvet descent through mirrored halls, whispered revolutions, and spoon-shaped subversions. We have wandered through an imagined asylum where etiquette is not merely behavior, but architecture, currency, and cage, and perhaps, too, resistance. In the silence of its gardens and the shadowed pages of its diaries, we discovered that rebellion need not roar. It may bow politely and still refuse. That irony, when worn as a velvet glove, can touch truths no scalpel reaches, and that manners, once weaponized, become maps, leading not just outward, but inward to freedom shaped like quiet assertion. As you drift now toward sleep, imagine yourself reclined upon a fainting couch, not as a patient, but as a witness. Let the hush of coded lullabies settle like fog across your thoughts. Let the silver spoon rest gently in your hand, no longer an emblem of control, but of subtle power. Outside, the electric birds may still mimic compliments, but inside, within you, language has softened, and strength has been repainted in lavender. You are no longer simply within the asylum. You are its quiet undoing. Good night, and may your dreams fold like napkins, precise, mysterious, and full of grace.